tonight's speaker, who is Colin, actually, how do I say your last name? Khoury, and from San Diego Botanic Garden. He is the Director of Science and Conservation at the garden and in Encinitas, which I think many of you are familiar with. He has a PhD from a university in Netherlands whose name I cannot pronounce. And he also has a Master in Science from the University of Birmingham in the UK, and I'm sure he'll fill in the background here some more for us. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to San Diego Horn Society.
Spectrum scam going around where people say they're from Spectrum.
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak with you. I think this invite was actually
We have
a good while
Spectrum.
ago, a number of months ago, and we've been looking forward to it. So much so actually that I brought reinforcements. I have Ben with me who directs our medicinal plants project, which has gotten a lot of attention. And if you're interested in it, he can answer the really technical questions, but he'll also come up and give a few words about the project when we get there. Tonight, so we were asked to speak about our emerging science and conservation program at the garden. And there's a lot going on. We have well over 30 major projects going on. And there's a risk of such a presentation of laundry listing and just kind of listing off stuff. And so what we're hoping to do is give you a little bit of a taste through a number of stories of what is going on. And then I would really love to field any questions you have, any thoughts, any counsel. I'm well aware that in this room and online, there are folks who know the garden much better than I do, frankly. And so really value that, that background and that knowledge, and appreciate the opportunity to converse with you all. That sound like a good plan for the next hour or so, a little bit less? Great. I will say, though, that I did grow up here in San Diego, in fact, in Escondido, and my memory of going to the garden when I was small was certainly this dragon tree, which is that classic one right on the corner there up by the Larrabee house. And I am so grateful and glad to have found my way back to San Diego after heading around the world doing plant science and conservation on 3 or 4 continents. And it's a great pleasure. I did put a few slides in because I wasn't quite sure about particularly, for instance, new membership here, but I'll run through it really quickly because I think, again, many of you, most of you really know this history, but we have founders, Ruth and Charles Larrabee, and who eventually Ruth donated the land to the County of San Diego, who continues to own the land under which the garden exists. And a number of decades later, the garden became a nonprofit organization to help manage all of these plants, all of these gardens, and all of the wildness that was hundreds of contributors, volunteers, docents, etc., installing bamboos and subtropical fruits and cycads and everything else that you now see there. So we're 50 years old, in fact, now. And these beautiful gardenscapes, which some of them I think look like they did a couple decades ago, like that dragon tree and some of the dragon tree plantings, others of which have really evolved over time, like the Mexican garden, the African gardens. Tropical rainforest, I'd be interested to know, but I think it's been that way for a couple of decades, at least that way. I love this undersea succulent garden, one of my favorite places really in the garden. And if any of you were part of making that happen, thank you. And I'd love to hear the stories about it. Probably my favorite part of the garden, the subtropical fruit garden, which I also grew up in that community a little bit in Vista and some nurseries, the wacky tropical, subtropical nursery areas of San Diego County, and appreciate that that's part of our garden. And then we get more to the native scapes, which comes closer to our work in science and conservation. We have gardens that try to display native plants as valuable places that plants that you could put in your own garden. There's children's gardens, of course, and our bamboos. Our education nursery, conservatory, which is now, 2 years old? And if you haven't been there, please come by. It's where we can now really display tropical and have our world of orchids, world of bromeliads, world of houseplants, and many other displays every few months. back to the natives, native plants and native people garden, an interpretation that was done in collaboration with Kumeyaay elders some 20 years ago, in which we're now renewing some of those relationships. And Ben might tell you a little bit about that if you're interested. And then finally, to me, the most, if you mind me saying this, some of the most precious areas of all of the garden, which are our two natural areas, which have true native, last remnant native areas in the garden, which are last remnants really because of urbanization in the area. There's very little of that sandstone shelves left right on the beach. And so we have our Del Mar manzanita that you can see there, which is a federally listed plant, and Encinitas baccharis and a number of other goodies that are really rare. You might have noticed in the last couple of years that we changed the whole entrance area, and now we have an entrance from a little bit further north on Quail Gardens Drive. And at the end of this presentation, if you'd like, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about our big plans that are really 20-year, 30-year plans to have to move what is already an incredible garden into a magnificent garden. And a lot of that has to do with getting rid of things like the large parking lot that is in the top of the garden and having more and more gardens in that area. Very excited about that. And I hope to be around at this garden long enough to see it through. So now we get to the science and conservation work. This is a story of incredible change and incredible movement in a very short amount of time. So I came on about 2 years ago, and we had a staff of essentially one that was starting to work into science at the garden or conservation work. And that was Tony Gurneau, who I'm sure that some of you know well. He's moved on to his own private business now, just recently, and we carry on the work. We're now 6 or 7, going to be 9 in a couple of months. And so we've grown a lot in this team. And again, Ben is here, but hope to get to know you, all of us on this list and in the next couple of years. So I just have a couple of slides with a little bit of text, and then every other slide in this entire show is just pictures of plants, which is my favorite thing, of course, to talk about, and I assume yours as well. What I wanted to tell you is about how we've started to think through doing work in science and conservation at the garden. And to take a step back, so public gardens exist around the world. There are thousands of them, and there are over 1,000 in the United States alone. Those gardens do all kinds of work, from displaying plants for recreation, for well-being, for people, for just a safe place to be, to educational activities, of course, for children, but also for adults, which we also do. And then increasingly this work that's really around trying to make the world a better place, not only in the garden itself, but outside. And so in our case, what is our role as this little regional garden that most, except for this laudable crowd here, a lot of folks in San Diego still haven't heard about. How do we go from something like that to really having a big impact throughout San Diego, or throughout San Diego County, or throughout Southern California or Baja California? What are we doing, and how are we going to make a bigger impact? And we are tasked to do that from our board, from Ari Novi, our director, who some of you know. We would really like to be part of making some positive change in the world. And so we have come up with a vision of how we're going to do that in our conservation, which, if you can read this italic font, it says that what we'd really like to do is do this work, this science and conservation, to enhance the persistence of, that's the conservation part, appreciation of, and access to plant diversity, not only in the garden and beyond it. And so that's what we're up to. I want to tell you actually about this picture for a minute. It's in some ways the most exciting picture that you will see, I think, throughout this. So I think I have a little red button here. And folks who are online, if you can't hear me, just let me know and I'll try to speak up. I don't have the loudest voice, but so you might see this little seedling in here. So Encinitas baccharis is a coyote bush that is native to, endemic to San Diego County. Hey, can I have a raise of hands of anybody that heard of Encinitas baccharis before? Awesome, so just a few. That's great. Well, just here. Okay. So it was described in Oak Crest Park, which is just up the road. You might know it. There's a senior center there in Encinitas, or a community center, I should say. And It was named after the daughter of the person who described it. And it's just this little wispy character that nobody ever quite recognized for years and years and years. So it was just described a couple decades ago. Very, very rare. And it's declining, it's disappearing. And it's mostly disappearing actually because I think because we're not having the fire cycles and the other normal activities that had gone on. And as we urbanize, there's just these little spots left like Oak Crest Park that were also not burning. And so it needs a little open space. It's getting crowded out by other chaparral and by the Torrey pines and such. We have been lucky enough to collect seeds as a botanic gardener and grow them. Nobody had ever grown them before. And it turns out they actually grow pretty easily. It wasn't that. So they're doing fine in our nursery. And then we put them out into our open space here. And what's exciting about this picture is that this is the very first seedling that came up by itself in the natural area there. So this was plants that came up, produces seed, threw them out there. And so it's regenerating for the first time actually anywhere. This occurs all the way down to Otay and around, but we've never seen any babies. So we're pretty excited about that happening. These are where we want to be headed to really make a change in San Diego and beyond. We would like to make rare plants less rare. We would like there to be more plant diversity around all of us. I think we can agree on that one as a horticultural society. We would like there in the public to be more awareness and appreciation of plant diversity and all that it gives us. We would like there to be more access to plant diversity. And beyond just thinking about plants, the landscapes, the ecosystems, we would like to really contribute to more native ecosystems around and more sustainability in our ecosystems, whether that's our backyards, natural areas or beyond. And finally, on the people side, we would like there to be and to contribute to more diversity and more opportunities for people within science and conservation, within plants. So we have some activities here. I'm not going to list them all out because that's a long list and I want to get to the pictures. But these are the ways by which we are now trying to make those aims happen through seed banking, through botany, through distributing plants, through researching plants, through outreach, all of this stuff coming together. And the programs that we find so exciting really mix all of those things together. And so Ben's program, for instance, in medicinals has a tremendous amount of education, planting plants, doing scientific research, outreach to kids, all of it in one project. All right, so for the rest of this presentation, I'd like to walk you through some of our projects, as I mentioned, and they fall essentially into three different areas. There's our native plant work, there's our medicinal work, and I'll hand it over to Ben at that point for a bit, and then there's our food and agricultural plant type work. I'm not going to focus too much for the rest of this conversation about some of the horticulture work that goes on in the garden that I think that you all have seen or have contributed to a lot, the orchids, the cycads, and other things. We're going to limit ourselves more to these new programs. All right. So one of our first opportunities to move beyond the garden was there in the city of Encinitas, where the city has started to look at their native remnant areas and how to restore some of these areas that are degraded and just have a lot of ice plant and other non-natives in it. And so one of these areas is at Moonlight Beach, that big square that you can see there, and then just up from there and Cottonwood Creek, there's an undeveloped area there. And so that was a competitive call, and there were businesses that applied to it and various others. The garden was chosen, well, I can't speak for the city of Encinitas, but I believe that the garden was chosen in part because we wanted to do things and engage the community in it. And so we wanted to have kids out there helping us with the conservation and restoration. We wanted to have volunteer groups, and that's what we've been able to do. And so this is, these are pictures already of when we've taken out the non-native species and we've now planted native species. And it's really become a really vibrant area with a lot of pollinators around and a much more beautiful landscape. It's a really exciting thing. The other big project that we started in the city of Encinitas was at a school, Ocean Knoll Elementary. And Ocean Knoll is a really special school that has not only a beautiful garden for the school, but a canyon right next to it that is part of the school program. And they've never really used it as much as they'd like to. It's an area where they would like to have educational programs and such going on. And so we have come in under some funding from the state, from the what's called the Coastal Conservancy, the State Coastal Conservancy, to repair and regrade, upgrade the riparian areas. So the essentially willow areas that are highly covered with non-natives, and then which also had a lot of arundo and pampas grass and those characters, and start putting natives in. Again, a lot of involvement with the community and with kids. So that has been really great work. We think that this is going to go on into bigger ways. If you're from North County, we have some aspirations and hopes to continue to collaborate with the city of Encinitas on other lands like Indian Head Canyon and others that would be really great to work in and continue to do this restoration work. We're also collaborating with a number of organizations like the Nature Collective, which was formerly the San Elijo Lagoon Conservancy, to be doing collaborative work together on environmental restoration. Please feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions. I'm going to now move into our native plant botany work, which is near and dear to the heart. The chance to go out into the wilderness in the most diverse county in the entire United States in terms of plant diversity, which if you don't know that you live in the most diverse county in all of the continental United States. And that's in terms of plants, but also birds and a few other metrics. And so one way by which we've been able to get out there is through collaborating with the Department of Interior's Bureau of Land Management. And they have lands throughout San Diego County, mostly on the desert area and on the transition down to the desert, and then at Otay Mountain. And Otay Mountain, if you have a chance to get out there, especially this year, which is the most incredible year in my lifetime in terms of plants, native plants, just because of the rain we had, get out there. There are roads, if you have a 4x4, there are roads to get up there without any problems, essentially, as long as you're in 4x. And so you get to a mountain that's almost entirely rare plants. And so this is a rare type of Monardella, one of these mints that's just this incredible little thing. And then this is the Otay manzanita that you see there. And there's this whole set of species that are all called Otayensis at the end of it, because they are only there. And that is because it's a mountain up in the desert. You know, it's high up and it has different things, but it also has different soils. And so it's a really special place. It also has a bunch of stuff that's really a Baja plant that's just barely creeped up onto that mountain. And so you find it if you're in Mexico, if you're still heading that way, but you don't really find it in the United States. And so there's a rare species of oak called Cedrus island oak that also just occurs there. And so in this project and a couple other ones, I'm going to go back to that one, but like this one, which we're just starting out in the desert, what our task is to learn about what rare plants are out there, confirm if the rare plants that are already known about are still there, find new populations, and then feed that information back to the Bureau of Land Management so that they can make stronger decisions about this incredible heritage of plants that are out in these areas. This project makes Otay seem easy. These are 5 different BLM lands that are all in that desert transition, and that's pretty much the least discovered part of San Diego County. Very remote, very difficult to get in. You know, lots of snakes and critters around, a lot of backpacking to get in there. And so it takes a hardy crew of folks that is really interested in going there, especially as we get into hotter time of the year. But so worth it. How many of you have gotten out to the desert in the last couple of weeks? Awesome. Yeah, so you know what I mean. What an incredible year. Yeah. So moving a little bit more into horticulture, and this is really new for the garden as far as I know. We have had the opportunity to look at bringing new plants, wild plants, into horticulture through ones that we found out in the wild that we think are really beautiful or interesting or drought tolerant, heat tolerant. And so one, through some support from the Stanley Smith Horticultural Trust, is to look at a type of pitcher sage that is just from Otay Mountain called Lepidemia ganderi, Gander's pitcher sage. And it's a beautiful plant. It's a pollinator plant. It's heat tolerant. It's drought tolerant. It's also very difficult to grow. And so nobody grows it essentially. And so we're trying to figure out how to take cuttings, how to take seed, how to get this into horticulture, how to move it into nurseries so that they'll be able to sell it and have it out there. So far getting some success. It's been about a year. I think it's going to take 3 or 4 more years till we've really figured this out. If you all know about how to grow pitcher sage, let me know. Let's chat. So in that vein, but let's say an even bigger set of charismatic species, we've had a number of smallish projects that we hope to keep ramping up on collecting seeds of some of our more threatened or imperiled trees, like the Torrey pine. And let me break that down. Torrey pines are really all around, and in some way that's fine, but the real native population is really constricted to Torrey Pine State Preserve, that area, and also to the Channel Islands. And so there are efforts to make sure that the pine cones are collected from all of the trees, or as many as possible, from its native distribution, and grow those in gardens, distribute them out so that we make sure that we have a wide genetic diversity of Torrey pines and others. And we're doing that on some of these crazy oaks as well. This one right here is that Cedros Island oak that I mentioned that just barely makes it up into the United States. It's just in one canyon out there in Otay. This one's Quercus palmeri, in case you happen to know your oaks and are interested in it. That's Palmer's oak. You know, and it just gets rarer after that. So we have the incredible pleasure to work with the San Diego Natural History Museum with John Redman, if you had a chance to know him, who's one of the great authorities of native plants in this area. And so I feel like we are very lucky to be as an organization coming into this world of folks who are looking after and paying attention to some of like the rarest of the rarest. And the ones that have one population out there or 3, and these guys are all like that. Anybody know Frankinia palmeri by chance? Have you heard of that one? Check it out if you're interested. It's again, it's really disappeared because of the beachscapes that no longer exist in San Diego. There's a couple populations in Silver Strand, which you can go find if you'd like to see a very, very rare plant. Just don't step on it, of course. So that is the native plant work that I wanted to talk about, and I'm happy to answer questions about where we're headed. I'm going to move over into story number 2, which is our medicinal plants program, and Ben can take it on and spend a few minutes, and then I'll head back for the last chapter, which is on food and agricultural plants.
I'm just going to go back a slide. Sorry to be repetitive. My name is Ben Naiman, and I'm just approaching tomorrow 1-year anniversary at the San Diego Botanic Garden. So it's a really exciting time for me. As Colin said, I'm sure there are people in the audience here and online who know a lot more about plants than I do. I'm actually not even trained in botany. So my background is in medicinal chemistry. I did a PhD in pharmaceutical sciences, and how that connects with what we're doing at the garden is the work on medicinal plants. And so when we think about medicinal plant uses as traditional medicines, so they have to be applied either topically or through ingestion, usually through boiling and teas and things like that, or potentially as vapors inhaled. So we're not talking about injecting medicinal plants. We're also not talking about replacing your Western medicine. We really encourage people to sort of have a complementary nature approach and an open mind. So as we think about what some of these medicinal plants have been used for historically, it's really, topically on wounds to clean them, to prevent infections, to remove bronchial congestion, arthritis, and other things like these. And in many cases, especially as we think about the communication that we have with our Indigenous partners here in San Diego, as well as further abroad, it also kind of goes into a lifestyle. People will say, oh, that's something that we were eating, but it also has this medicinal property. So we're very interested in conserving some of these medicinal plants and also understanding the biochemistry that makes them functional. A couple interesting examples, I guess, before I go forwards. Some of these medicinal plants, for example, Echinacea purpurea, are actually categorized as drugs in other countries. So in the EU, and I think especially Germany and UK, this is something that is in herbal medicine. That is not how FDA categorizes them. So St. John's wort, for example, would be a botanical dietary supplement here, but it is being investigated in clinical trials for how it can help people medicinally. And as we sort of focus down on what's going on at the Botanic Garden, well, I could honestly talk about just this one slide for about an hour. I promised Colin I'd just be a few minutes and give him back the microphone. I also want to say at the forefront that this is not all my work. So I am sort of overseeing a project that encompasses, I think, 9 people across all departments of the garden. So our garden and nursery horticulture, our education team, our visitor services, our science and conservation. Everybody has some part to play in this project. And so while I'm speaking, they're all kind of lifting me up, if you will. So what are we doing? Well, we're building out the medicinal plant collection at the San Diego Botanic Garden. And by the end of, I guess, the coming year, we plan to have over 500 different species level organisms of medicinal plants. So we've had to spend a lot of time and energy thinking about which ones to grow and where to collect them from, and which partner organizations to contact in terms of sharing those plants. And that's for us to grow, but also to distribute. All right, so that's very important to us. We're also working to educate the public more about medicinal plants, the connection between medicinal plants and Western pharmaceutical agents. Since 200 years ago, there really was not a large pharmaceutical industry. You know, you would go to a pharmacist and they would give you a plant-based medicine. So it's old knowledge together with new knowledge. What are the technical methods that we use to develop a new sort of Western drug from traditional medicines? And we're also doing some of that research in-house and through partnerships at the Salk Institute, especially. But we realize that there's a lot of opportunities to work with other groups in the San Diego area and beyond. And so we have built a research consortium that now has over 15 member institutions in San Diego. That's academics, that's nonprofits like us and others. We have a couple tribal governments now. Colin mentioned earlier our long-term partnership with the Hamul band of Kumeyaay people. And so they have been involved from the beginning of this project. And recently we've been connecting out with other Indigenous partners from both Kumeyaay and Luiseno groups. And so we're really excited about that for how our work can help to benefit them, not only through, you know, the potential development of new commercial products, if they are so interested, but also conserving and developing horticulture methods to get their medicinal plants to be, you know, climate change adaptive, to be growing in the environments where the reservations are compared to where the traditional distribution of all the people used to be. So there's a direct sort of help for that. And in our consortium, as I sort of indicated towards, we also have some for-profit companies that are working with us. And again, you know, several different academic institutions beyond just the Salk. And so with that, we're building out some contracts that assure an access and benefit sharing agreement, so that if someone is giving us traditional knowledge or plants from their sovereign nations, that benefit goes back to them at the beginning and later on if there's a commercial development, either through the commercial sales of plants, through maybe processed plants like teas, or even, you know, for example, 20 years from now, an FDA approved medicinal product. So we're really excited about all of these things. As I said, I could really talk on and on and on, but I think it's better that I return it to Colin. I guess I should emphasize the 2 medicinal plants that we're really studying in a deep dive biochemical approach, which are indicated here, but I know the text size is a little bit small, so I apologize for that. So on the left, we're looking at Artemisia californica. This is California sagebrush, and all of Artemisia are also known as the wormwoods. And so, you know, people that are thinking about Artemisia absinthium or vulgaris, so historically used to make absinthe and other tinctures. It's been used basically across the entire genus by every indigenous population that has access to it for different things. This is a very important medicinal plant genus. And there's also an FDA approved drug called artemisinin, which is the current standard of care for quinine and chloroquine resistant malaria across the world. And so that discovery and development actually yielded a Nobel Prize to the sort of leader of the team that discovered it from Artemisia annua in China. And we hope to really connect on that, both for public engagement and also the kind of pharmaceutical developments that could come afterwards from Artemisia californica and other related species. We're working also with the genus Eriodictyon, which is Yerba Santa, or the so-called holy herb. And this is something that really is growing up and down California across the genus. a little bit up into Oregon and a few states adjacent, as well as down into Baja California, Norte and Sur. Otherwise, it doesn't exist anywhere else in the world except for in collections that it's been shared, from botanic gardens and others. But again, every population that has encountered the Areodictyon species has been using it largely as a tea or as something that you would inhale to treat bronchial disorders. However, our partner Pam Maher at the Salk Institute has actually gone through phytochemical studies to find the chemistry that can be used directly to treat Alzheimer's disease, and actually shown it all the way up through animal models with mice. And so she is working with us, and we are working with her to try to advance those chemistries further into clinical development. It's currently in a preclinical phase. And we're also trying to understand better why and how the plants produce those molecules, and how we can sort of coax them or encourage them to produce more of those molecules and more of the other molecules through horticultural methods, through stressing them, through potentially cutting, sun exposure, different soil conditions, pH, adjusting the water that we're giving them, so that we can learn more about how to optimize the growth of these medicinal plants. I will return to Colin. Should we break for questions now or do questions later?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so I was wondering, so at St. John's Wort is not native, right? It's European, I think. So are you guys working with that? My question is mainly, are you trying to focus on California natives or like regional natives or even like Plantaranthus type of thing that aren't?
It's a great question. I'm just going to repeat briefly for
Oh, yeah.
the people online, and also if I'm so wrong, just tell me. The question is about, for example, St. John's Wort being non-native to here, and if we're interested in all medicinal plants or just native medicinal plants. So for our collection, for the purpose of teaching the public as well as growing them for potential future research projects, we are very interested in medicinal plants of the whole world. Certainly, it's easier to work with things that are native, or at least domestic. As we start to think about going on our international trips, which we are planning, there's just a lot more paperwork to get into in terms of the access and benefits sharing, biodiversity agreements, which are extremely important to us, and then also the risk of introducing new invasives or bringing in new pests and all of the processes that go with that. So for our research, we're focused primarily right now on native plants. And this also helps us a lot with our conservation team being able to directly go access some of those in the field. It ties in with partner buy-in from our Indigenous partners, that it's plants that are of interest to them, that are useful to them. And one of the really interesting things that's come up is that plants that are becoming harder for Indigenous people to find and use are actually very interesting and important for us to help conserve for their cultivation, even if it's not really an endangered species or rare that we would otherwise include it in conservation. Thanks.
Go ahead.
So it's really hard to read. I'm fascinated by what you're doing, but I have to think you've got funding sources there. Kind of read. But I have to believe it's really common, right? Because you have funding that might be looking for commercial opportunities as opposed to Native American preserving culture history. How do you keep that all organized?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, it's about the funding of the project and also how we balance out. Yeah, and also how we balance out funding and the implications that it has, basically, from a pharmaceutical company versus the needs and interests of the Indigenous people. Our current funding has been provided solely from the Conrad Prebys Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization, as well as some private philanthropists that have donated directly to the Botanic Garden. So we don't owe them anything. So at this point, where we are is a nonprofit horticulture group, and we're really working to sort of be a bridge in the middle that we can connect some of those companies and introduce them as an opportunity directly to the people where those plants are coming from. In some cases, the plants are already in our collection. There's things that we're growing and we don't have as many concerns. But this is something that we're being very cognizant of and trying to proactively engage with contracts, because actually there aren't enough legal protections, and we would love to see more of that be developed over time. I think in the interest of time, I'll stick around afterwards if people want to chat, but I want to give Colin the mic back.
Thanks. I brought Ben along because this project really does garner a lot of attention, and I figured there'd be some questions. So thanks for coming, and we are happy to answer questions. So to recap, this native plant work that we're trying to do is really about protecting this incredible natural resources in this region, about also hopefully having those out in gardens more, and backyards and all of that, more sustainability, more drought tolerance, more heat tolerance, all of that. This work right here, this medicinal work, it's about conservation. It's also about human quality of life. We would love it to be part of this long chain of organizations that would be really helping increase people's health. And of course, we do that by being a garden and people coming to us just to have relaxation and experience with plants. But this would be another tremendous way to really contribute to the world. Yeah, not just San Diego, right? Really to the world. And then the third story that we have is around food and agricultural plants, or that diversity. And there, of course, is diversity in everything that we eat and grow, which comes from all these different parts of the world. These are the origins and regions of diversity of all these different crops. And yeah, the seating out here is pretty far from the slide. So anyway, there's a lot of diversity that comes from every continent. There's lots more crops, of course, we eat that aren't on this map. And that includes diversity here in North America. And so this is a heat map where the colors, the darker red colors, have more plants, more diversity, more species. But everywhere in the United States, there is a wild plant that's related to a crop. So a wild grape or a wild potato or wild corn. And those are really interesting plants. They have adaptation, again, to non-domesticated environments, to, again, not needing water and not needing fertilizer and all of that. And they also are very often resistant to pests and diseases that are difficult challenges within agriculture. And so a lot of projects going on to figure out who those species are and whether they're already available through botanic gardens or seed banks, or whether we need to collect them more. And so we have a project working on wild grapes. If you didn't happen to know, grapes are a really interesting group where there's one grape that's primarily eaten or drank around the world. And that grape is from Europe, from West Asia. But here in North America, we have probably the most diverse, well, there's 2 regions of the world that have the most diversity of species. North America has 35 or 40 different species of wild grapes, and East Asia also has about the same. And so some of those grapes were eaten, are used as medicinals, and others by the native peoples. Some of them haven't been explored much at all. All of them almost can be used actually to bring in as a graft stock for vinifera. And so you can get more resistance to soil pests and diseases and other issues through that. So it's a really interesting group, and we're working on that with a bunch of organizations throughout North America. And then we're collecting locally some really neat wild relatives of crops, like our wild walnuts that occur in the canyons here, going out and collecting them. And then also collaborating on trying to understand diversity around the world and where that is, including for chili peppers and other crops. And a lot of that is planning, scientific thinking and planning that goes to other organizations who have money or power, who can make decisions about, okay, we're going to really invest in this region of the world that's got this chili pepper diversity, so that it's available for others. And so really proud to be part of this work. This is obviously very collaborative work that's more global. And so the other story I wanted to tell you all that I think is very true is that we've gone from an organization that's really just in the garden, which is a tremendous impact in and of itself, of course, to doing this native plant work across San Diego County, to doing this medicinals work, which is definitely national, if not bigger, then to this food and agricultural work, which is really global with organizations all over. And so this is work we're doing in Peru, which is the center of origin of potatoes. It's been grown there for 7,000 or more years. And one of the questions, which I think is really one of the big questions around diversity, entirely plant diversity, is what's going on with it? What are we losing it? And why are we losing it? And what can we do to change that course? And that's true in crops as well as it is in native plants and other things. And so what we're doing down there is going back to the center of origin where it's been grown forever, and to where places have been, people have been going for 100 years actually, and already marking down because they know it's such an important place. Okay, these are the varieties that are grown in this valley, in this part of Peru. This is actually a region called Paucartam. And we're going back to the same communities, sometimes in the same families, some decades later, and having conversations with the same families to understand why things are changing, and also why people are keeping that diversity around if they're keeping it. Like these folks who are called custodian farmers or diversity farmers, who even though their neighbors will grow 5 or 10 varieties of potatoes, this guy and his brother grows over 200 varieties of potatoes on his farm, in part because he just really loves that diversity. And there's other reasons too that are more pragmatic. And so trying to trick that out, like who are these folks? What are they up to and how can we support them? This is a project that I just want to mention very quickly. We're also getting into climate change research. What is really going on with climate change in crops and in wild plants. And we have a really exciting collaboration with the University of Colorado and USDA to look at sunflower diversity and how it's moving under climate change. Oops, excuse me. All right, so that was story number 3. The last little bit that I want to talk about is other stuff that doesn't fit in these 3 categories that we're excited that we're doing. And one is beyond plants and into the pollinators, which obviously, right? And so a lot of collaborations, including with UCSD here, who have on the property, and if you come by and know where to go or ask us, we can get you there. We have some research plots that are looking at which pollinators visit, which ornamental and which native plants, what kind of diversity is there, just to really learn, like, if you plant something in your backyard, how valuable is it as a pollinator plant? Really get in there. The other thing, this picture right here, this picture here is also very exciting and very high-tech stuff. Almost as high-tech as this whole setup we have here at the Horticultural Society to have these Zoom and in-person meetings. So nobody knows what the pollinator of that Encinitas baccharis is, which is that coyote bush that I mentioned that's really rare, really local to Encinitas. And so, and it turns out it's pretty tough to sit around and just watch forever this little wispy plant. And so there are some very smart young students at Cal State San Marcos who are developing a camera, but it's the development of the learning of the computer behind the camera to detect when something's an insect and then what type of insect it is. And so we're starting to learn what the pollinators are of this rare plant, which is a neat thing. This is a really neat project that some of you might know about already. In World War II, after the bombing of Hiroshima, everything was totaled in that center area. The plants, the trees in that area were burnt to the ground. And then some of them survived and resprouted, including ginkgos. And that symbol of regrowth is so powerful. And so there are Japanese organizations that are now connecting with organizations around the world through basically a peace process of sending those seeds out so that others can grow them and have them around. And San Diego Botanic Garden is honored to be part of that process of distributing ginkgos and others from these mother trees that somehow survived the atomic bomb. Last, I want to mention my favorite project of all. And so again, you all are far away from this, but the folks online might be able to see it. This is a collaboration between 4 major gardens: San Diego Botanic Garden, California Botanic Garden, which what used to be called Rancho Santa Ana, and Atlanta, and the Morton Arboretum. And it's a fabulous project where we have the honor to bring in 2 young folks who have graduated college, but haven't yet moved on in their career and didn't perhaps have a lot of opportunities to do science and conservation with plants, that they get to come in and work for a year. We get 2 that start in August and will work for us for a year, and each of the other 3 gardens gets 2. And then they will graduate, so to speak, and move on with their lives, and then we'll get 2 more, and we'll do that 3 years in a row. And so it's really our first chance to cultivate the next generation of horticulturalists, plant scientists, conservationists. And it's so exciting to us that value mentorship, which both Ben and I do, and others in the garden, to really be part of that process, to have more folks getting involved in this, and the young people. And so this picture on the left is near and dear enough to my heart that if you don't mind, I'll tell one more story before we're just about done. So beans, lima beans, pinto beans are one of my favorite groups of plants, and what I did a lot of my academic research on. And in California, we have one species that's a wild species relative to beans. And we in fact just have one place that it's ever been seen. It's a really strange coincidence. It's really, this species really occurs in Baja California and a little bit in Arizona, but it was seen one time 40 years ago in Riverside County, actually kind of near Coachella. And I always figured there's got to be a mistake there. It was like somebody misunderstood. Like it's not near the border, just one time seen 40 years ago, but a very good botanist from UC Riverside, Andy Sanders. Anyway, I've been looking for this for quite a while, and we went out last year in the spring and didn't find it where it was seen 40 years ago. But then we remembered, or I just sort of, remembered that this is really one of those Baja plants that sprouts after the monsoon rains. And not a winter rain plant. And we had monsoon rains this last summer, if you might remember, towards the end of the summer, we started getting rain. And so we went out in the fall and we found this wild bean, first time in 40 years it's been seen. And it rained all the way through the winter, as you know, and so we keep seeing it. And it's, I mean, there's only 11 individual plants out there of this wild bean, but we're very excited that it's back after 40 years and looking into it. And I'm hoping that one of these young scientists that we work with will get in this plant and really try to understand better, how did it get there, why is it there, and what's it doing, and all of that. So to wrap things up, I hope that we've given an adequate idea that we've got a lot of momentum and we're really excited. We've got a young, ambitious team doing a lot of work. We also are starting to have some good infrastructure. We now have a seed bank with a good freezer and a germinator where we can grow plants more controlled. We've got a couple of trucks. We've got big plans to become stewards of some of the rarest plants in the world, from cycads. This is my only cycad real picture of the slideshow, and to our local oaks, which are also really rare. And then, as I mentioned in the beginning, big plans for the whole garden itself. And these are just depictions. They're just kind of a rough idea of some of the buildings that are being planned out. But what I want to just give you an idea of is that there's a master planning process starting to happen right now that is envisioning the garden 20 to 30 years from now. It'd be great if it happened sooner, of course, but that's how long things take to really evolve. And this would mean maximizing the gardens in that 37 acres. So that, for instance, that old parking lot that's right on the top that has that beautiful multi-million-dollar view of the ocean will really become gardens and event spaces for people. Also, the back of the house, if you've been back there where the nurseries are, we're going to move that into open gardens for folks and move our nurseries further down where they're a little less out of the incredibly beautiful view of the ocean. And that's going to involve building a parking structure so that we can have more people be able to get in there. That's much lower down on Quail Gardens Drive. New pathways, ADA accessible pathways throughout, all of that sort of stuff. We're really excited about it. You're going to hear a lot about it as many of you are members, and personally incredibly excited to be part of a process that actually is 20, 30 years long. And if I, through my career, I'm able to make it to that point of being part of building what's going to be really beautiful and incredible, then it'll be a great thing to have done in my career, I think. So that's the end, and we're happy to stick around. I hope we're just about on time for an hour or so, but happy to stick around and answer any questions. And I'll bring Ben back up because I think half will be for him. And let me just check in. Are we okay on timing and can answer a few questions, or we're all right? Okay, I'll start fielding some. Would you come up, Ben?
Broad, really astounding, and I think the layer of people would be amazed, really happy. But I think you left one out. From my perspective, I was searching online after I heard one of the speakers from the Botanic Garden, and there's a collaboration among international horticultural gardens like Kew Gardens and other famous gardens where they keep track of what plants are where and they exchange them. San Diego Botanic Garden presentation. I forgot the name of it. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of projects that come to mind. So the question was around one that I may have forgotten, and I did just give some highlights. And this was really a project that had a lot to do with we're working with other gardens around the world and distributing plants and figuring out where is everything and where the diversity is. Is that about right? And exchanging, yeah. Oh, great, yeah, thank you, perfect, thank you, now I got it. So, okay, this is a neat thing, so I think in olden days, people just wanted to have their thing and their garden, their plant, and kind of keep it. But there's really a recognition that we can't do, every garden can't do that, and it doesn't make any sense to work that way anyway, and if we're gonna make any traction on the problems of the world, which just get bigger and bigger, we gotta work together. And so how do you work and know that in England, they've got this diversity and that complements this diversity up in Atlanta, and it complements the diversity in San Diego. And so that's really happening with a lot of different plants. And cycads might be a good example where San Diego built its cycad collection kind of out of amazing, enthusiastic folks. But now we're looking at what we are custodians of versus what the Huntington has, versus what other folks up in Santa Barbara have, versus the folks in Florida, and seeing how we can complement each other and have less overlap and more complementarity. And that's a really exciting, I think, way of thinking that makes a lot of sense in the long term. Hope that's an adequate answer. Is there a question? Yeah. Yeah, it was that. Yeah.
I got a question. But,
Okay.
So, the plant that was on Otay,
Yeah. Lepikini. Yeah, great question. Okay, so the plant that we're growing from Otay called Lepikini ganderi, gander is pitcher sage. Where does it grow? And what's it doing out there? And then maybe underlying that question is, can we learn from that? Or is it not going to work at the San Diego Botanic Garden because it's not that mountain? Those are all great questions that we frankly don't know the answer to. But what's a really interesting thing is some plants that are really local really need certain things. Some, they have other reasons that are not particularly evident where they're actually adaptable to other areas. So a good example might be actually the Monterey pine. That Monterey pine in its own right is a pretty local pine that now grows through plantations throughout the world. So somehow it had this flexibility actually once it came out. So we're just learning whether that, this plant is going to be actually easy or incredibly difficult. It falls more in the second category so far, but we're going to keep plugging away at it and seeing. I think, ultimately there's probably some reasons why some plants are in horticulture and others are not. And you got to sort out which ones are going to be too difficult to work with and which ones are worth your time. Yes, please.
I was just thinking, are you working at all with trying to replace using wood for paper and all that to grow hemp on a, I'm trying to bring that to mind and save the world.
Yeah, great. Well, yeah. So question around whether we've gotten into looking at plants like hemp that could be really helpful to replace paper, like overuse of trees. We haven't gotten too much into textiles or paper, those sort of plants. Ben may have a few things to say on that of where we're headed. If you'd like, would you like to? Yeah. And okay, I'll hand it over to Ben on that one.
I don't know how Colin knows this because actually I just had a conversation 2 days ago over the weekend with someone at a very large company, but not only just with hemp, we have the national collection of bamboo, the most number of species of bamboo in any botanic garden in the country, I think maybe even in the world, I'm not quite sure. And people are interested to learn if we could use bamboo pulp instead. And bamboo is something that consumers will actually purchase. So the market research has been done on that already. And you can buy sheets made of it, toilet paper and everything else. So I think that's going to be really exciting. Yeah. And I did pose to the people on the chat group if there's any questions, so we're gonna try to watch that too. Please ask away.
I have a question. The bean in Riverside, no one saw it for 40 years. Does that imply there was a seed sitting there for 40 years waiting for the right conditions to grow?
Awesome.
Or
I love,
something like that?
I love the question. I love it. So the question was around this crazy wild bean that hadn't been seen in 40 years. In 40 years. And does that imply that it's been sitting in the soil for 40 years? Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there were probably some years it came up, but you should see this thing. It is, first of all, the beans are 2 millimeters and look just like a little rock and a really hard seed cover, and they could last for years and years and years. I know that because worked in beans a long time, and even the domesticated beans will last for decades. So I fully believe that these things can sit around in the soil. And what they need, interestingly, what they need is a little bit of water, and then they need to run down the canyon and get scraped by the sand to pull off some of that seed coat. And then they get in the right spot and they sprout up and you get them finally going. So, yeah.
They end up at the bottom.
These are exactly all the questions that I'm hoping that these young scientists come in and answer for us. A question in the back.
So is the walnut edible?
Oh, yeah. Is the local wild walnut edible? Absolutely. Yeah. It's hard. It's a smaller nut and it's harder to get out, but it's absolutely edible. Yep. In the canyons. If right, yeah. So are you all familiar with iNaturalist or various other cowscape, those sort of things? So you can find where they are. I will say there's an interesting mystery going on here in San Diego that I would love if any of you know about. It turns out that a lot of the occurrences, not all of it, a lot of the occurrences of this native black walnut are actually pecans. And they look enough similar that people think that they're walnuts, but they're actually pecans. And pecans are not from here. They're from the Midwest and such. And so, but this is not like an old homestead where there's a pecan. It's like a little canyon by your backyard. And this walnut at the bottom and the willows, new tree. It's been around 30 years. That happens to be a pecan. And I don't know why and how that's going on. I assume that this is, plantings on people's property and then birds or somehow getting down in these canyons, but many canyons that we've been surveying here in San Diego, there's 1 or 2 pecans in them. So if you happen to know the story behind that, I appreciate enlightening us. And the point is there also, those pecans are out.
I forgot to mention that we should all be really amazed at what they're doing with our members and our donations to the Botanic Garden, how well used that has been.
Oh, boy. Well, thank you. That comment was, I believe, just a comment of reflection about the use of member dues at the San Diego Botanic Garden for some of this work. And I certainly will say that we appreciate it very much. And this work that you saw, it is through all of that support and also all these grants, partnerships with organizations like the Bureau of Land Management and others, the Conrad Prebys Foundation. And I mean, this is how we get to do our work, and we're a nonprofit, so we do it for doing the work, and so happy to have those partnerships. Yeah, and if you all would like to get more involved directly in some of these projects, we have our volunteers and our docents, and we have a lot of seeds to clean in our seed bank, and a lot of herbarium specimens to press, a lot of plants to move from 2-inch pots to 4-inch pots and such, and so you're always welcome to come out and join our team.
Is there taller than I am? Anyway, I just want to thank Colin and Ben for the presentation. And be sure to join us next month. We'll be online and Zoom with Debbie Dunn, our new membership chair, will be telling us about how to create a water-wise landscape. Thank you all for coming and good night.